We always bias towards action, and it's kind of odd to think about not doing things. Not necessarily saying no, but like asking the question, like, is this something that we need to do right now?
What are we going to get from this? And then what are the costs? And is that return going to be higher than the costs? And obviously, almost goes without saying, but I think it's worth just calling that out because that is sort of the framework that I'm filtering all of these opportunities through. And a very simple example would just be we would get in touch with some fancy sports team, some random NFL or MLB team, and Mike and I would sort of look at each other and wonder, okay, how much time should we be investing in this over the next 6 to 12 months? And sort of what is best case scenario in terms of the return? And I think that's where some of my experience at my past company helped because I was able to say to Mike, listen, based on our goals right now, what this is going to look like is like 6 to 12 months of product testing. And maybe at 12 or 18 months, we can then decide if we want to spend $2 million with an annual sponsorship with the Boston Red Sox on awareness. And when looking at it through that lens, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to invest 18 months as a team into cultivating that relationship.
We had an opportunity come up with a tier one conference where things, like all opportunities, they seemed great initially. And so we got really excited about it. And the event was also excited. Across the team, some of the upside came in relation to being aligned with thought leaders that we respected, thought leaders that we didn't have relationships with. We were forecasting potential conversions that would come and exposure for the product and the brand and all of these things. And so as we got further along in the conversations, we said, what would need to be true for this to actually pan out? And we had listed a number of bullets. We went through these bullets with the event, and the one flag that came up initially was we had requested, let's have a contract for this. If we want commitments on our end and you've got commitments on your end, it's better for both of us. And because we felt that there was maybe a little bit more leverage from a thought leader or a brand perspective of this tier one event, we conceded to their request to not have a contract. And it didn't feel great, but there was a lot of, we trust there's going to be follow through. And where things started to go south was slowly over time, we'll call it over a 4 to 8 week period, some of the things that we initially discussed and agreed upon. And again, these are like recorded meetings. We didn't want to say like, hey, we both agreed on this, but they started to slowly get pulled back or changed in like, we might be able to do that, but it wasn't committed to as concretely as we had hoped. And so that, combined with some of the logistical considerations and the time investment that it would have taken for our team, we said, this is the point where we're pulling the plug. And the irony is that when we went back to the event and we said, we're no longer doing this, they basically went and they said, hey, like, no, like we have to move forward. Here are the things. They wanted to make concessions to like revisit the thing. And it just wasn't something that we felt comfortable with. So the takeaway was it's never too late to say no, and it's never too late to change your mind. Being very explicit, what it led to was a memo that we said, here's our outlook on conferences, events, and trade shows, because we get these requests all the time. And it was way easier to commit to write whatever it took. Let's say it was like 2 days to write some memo that we now say internally every time this comes up, whether it's with ourselves so we can revisit and say like, oh yeah, that's what we agreed upon, or new team members come on board and they'll say, hey, there's an MLB opportunity. We can just say, here's the document. This is the way we think about these things moving forward. So it was a nice way of taking something that we had invested some time into, preventing it from happening before we got even deeper, and also saying it's okay. Like there's some costs. We're throwing that out. We're not going to anchor on like going, because the downside to investing all this time and not having it work out the way that we had hoped is way worse than like some potential upside that might not even happen the way we hope. So that was one example of many of these sports partnerships and events where we had changed our mind completely from what had happened, and we turned what was maybe a negative outcome or a negative sentiment, maybe a little deflating. Like we were all very excited about it, and we turned this deflating uh, touch point into something that was positive, and now we've got like pretty good strategy or pretty good reasoning of why we think about things the way we do.
I do think that there was reticence across the board in terms of the people that were involved in this to then go back, kind of tail between our legs and be like, hey, it didn't actually work out. And, in part, it's probably on us a little bit, it's on them. And so I think it was a more like courageous move to pull the plug on it. And I think that we need as a team to get comfortable doing that because so often you need to, at least in part, you need to take some steps towards pursuing some of these opportunities to then find out that it's not worth continuing to pursue.
Yeah, I think the key is always question your own decisions, and it's okay to question others. Like there's still disagree and commit. We shouldn't keep questioning and questioning over and over, but if something feels a little off, it's okay to flag it, and it's okay to go back on those decisions. So when you make the decision yourself, like you own that decision, that is yours. It is entirely up to you to go back on it, and the team, if you go back on it, the team is going to trust. So it doesn't matter if it seems like it's small and incremental. It could be something as small as we decided that we were going to email 10 people, and to go back and say, like, even though it's only 10, again, this seems like small, I don't think we should do it, and hear the reasons why. Like that is entirely okay, even if you've invested 20 hours into it, because if you've got some reason that doesn't have to do with something that's subjective, let's just make up a loose example, it's subjective and somebody feels maybe a little bit uncertain about the copy that they wrote for the email, and they say, I don't know if members will receive this. That's something that wouldn't necessarily be a decision to go back on. But if you've got something that's objective, like, I think this is going to lead to 10 members churning, people will support that. They're not going to say, well, we've already invested 20 hours and there have been 5 of us involved, like we have to send this. That's an entirely okay reason. So it doesn't matter whether the decision is about emailing 10 people or if it's something as significant as we have $100,000 invested in this and we should stop. That money is not coming back. We have 1,000 hours of team time invested. We're not getting that back, like sunk costs. It's okay to go back on those decisions. It's never too late if you've got good reason why. So it's a good takeaway and a good lesson learned.
When I think about some of the partnerships, podcast opportunities, we've had to be really explicit about when we want to pursue certain partnerships and when we don't, even if they cross our plate right now. So a good example of this, and why not? We'll name some names, but Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss.
Get in there.
Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss were two of the top names sort of in our orbit for a while now. And at one period of time, we were very explicit with ourselves and internally that we weren't ready for either of them. So we probably had lines into both of them, maybe one more than another, but we were explicit about, hey, despite the fact that we were pursuing a lot of podcast health and wellness partnerships, we're going to hold off right now on Joe and Tim. And then at a certain point in time, that changed to, okay, we're comfortable pursuing one of them based on the inroads we had and the relationships we have, but not another. And that other person, we needed to wait until we were out of beta and the product experience was better. So I think it's just a good example of orienting the team around clear decision-making criteria, making sure that everyone is aligned around when we're going to say yes and when we're going to say no.
The hardest thing to do is there's this dichotomy. So it's the dichotomy between being relatively anchored and standing ground on decision, saying, nope, we're aligned on this and this is our outlook. But then when new things come along, being open-minded enough so that you can say, should we break this decision that we made in order to pursue this opportunity? And this happens all the time. It's like you don't want to be so anchored that you're not flexible and not open-minded, but you want to be anchored enough that no matter how interesting an opportunity seems, no matter how many times this comes up, you fail to waver on this decision. You have zero willingness to waver on your own decision and what you've made. but you have to sort of balance between both. And so these things will continue to come up. Um, that's one of the things that we highlighted in that documentation that says, like, it's not that we're not going to consider events altogether. They need to meet the criteria of 1, 2, and 3 for us to even consider them. And if they don't meet that, then it's out the door. And that's something that I think we can extrapolate as an example across the company, where when these things come up, like, we're going to be anchored on certain things and not on others. Um, you can extrapolate this to enterprise, to B2B, to partnerships, to you name it. But there will be these things that come up at different scales of the company. And all that happens is the scale continues to increase as far as the impact and the importance of the decision that's made.